So just by way of introduction, obviously Tom is the CEO of Monterosa, a fan engagement business, I suppose, is one easy way of describing you. So you're headquartered in London, obviously via the world, via Zoom, via everywhere. So would it be quite useful, I think, for us to perhaps get a little bit of a sense as to Monterosa as a business? How do you tend to describe it to people when you sort of first come across them?
Well, it changes as a lot of businesses do, and it has evolved over the last few years from a business that was, I guess, it was a solutions orientated company originally. We would work with media and sport businesses to create interactive solutions, and we invested very heavily in software in order to create a more scalable business out of what the kernel had emerged to become. And so we now go front and center with the platform. So we describe Monterosa as the interaction platform for fan engagement, or if you're working in television, you'd say audience interaction.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that we provide the software platform that powers massively scalable interactive experiences for big brand interactive events.
What's been the kind of biggest brand or biggest event you've been involved with?
Well, our most recent new customer is Liverpool Football Club, which is great for me as a fan, and great for them because particularly now we're garnering such enormous numbers around everything to do with the club. That's pretty high profile and pretty big. But I guess the sort of some of the top customers that we work with, ITV, pretty much all of their sort of large scale reality, talent, lifestyle programming has some form of interaction that's powered by Monterosa, from Love Island to This Morning to Britain's Got Talent, all that stuff. There's around sort of 30 big name brands in sport and entertainment that we work with.
So to get to your career, as it were, I mean, you didn't start off in interactive, did you?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I was a keen programmer as a kid. I got into programming various computers. Coincidentally, my auntie, my dad's sister, was a maths teacher who just got into computers years ago. I mean, that must have been the 70s. So I was born in 78. So sometime in the 80s, she got into computers and gave me one for a present, and I got into programming. So by the time I got to working age, I knew how to use computers. So my first job was in the sector, and in those days, I can't remember what year this would be now, but I got my first job at 17, and there was a very exciting computer games industry in Merseyside at the time, across Merseyside, not just Liverpool, but I got a job in that sector. So it was interactive. It was kind of computer games and post-production. That's kind of where I started.
Yeah, interesting. So I did a little bit of research of you, obviously in advance of this particular interview, as you would expect.
You stalked me.
I have stalked you in a very polite and obviously middle-class way. But what I've established is that you have a particular skill around mental ray rendering.
That was that job. That was what I was doing. That first job of mine was I was the techie that went and set all that stuff up for. It was great actually, because it was that was the era where CGI had really kicked off. The kind of price point had come down a bit. So, not anyone, it's still expensive, but more companies could create amazing animated effects.
Yeah.
And the coolest rendering software was Mental Ray, which, God, I'd forgotten all about it really, but I think it's still going now. It's really sort of advanced way of creating CGI environments and that kind of thing. So I got quite into that early doors. Yeah, it was good fun.
It's a nice skill to be able to fall back on in COVID-19 moments when you need to do a little bit of rendering. You're the man to go to.
I'm not sure I could blag it now. I mean, I would try, but I think you'd see through me.
Yeah, no worries. Well, it's always all down to the blow. So out of interest, in terms of obviously from those beginnings, as it were, I mean, when it comes to making your sort of career decisions in the early stages, and again, none of us are sort of blessed with hindsight, as it were, but I mean, how have you kind of made your career decisions? Have you always had a bit of a vision as to where you wanted to go, or what's been your kind of approach to career and making those kind of calls?
Well, I suppose the answer is I've always had a vision of something at some time, but it has changed quite a lot. Ambition has changed quite a lot. I mean, it's quite hard to break these things down and to be accurate about it. But I suppose my take on it would be that I've always been incredibly interested in entertainment, music. I've got friends who worked in the music business, and I grew up in a very musical family. We were obsessed with performance forever, really, and I always wanted to work in that sector. There was never the sort of talent or anything like that, but I was always just really interested in the performing arts. I did a bit of youth theatre as a kid. I really liked the whole performance stuff, but again, wasn't particularly good at it personally. But there was something in me that wanted to work heavily in performing arts. And actually, I was a music manager for a while. I managed a folk artist on the side, and I thought I managed my brother's band as well. We thought we were going to be massive and globally famous, and none of those things happened. But music business was good. I used to promote gigs. I used to put on shows in West Africa and Ghana, where some of my family are from. I just did a lot of stuff in those days whilst being a techie, and you could make a bit of money being a techie as either a permanent job or a freelancer in those days in the dot-com boom. So, it afforded me, I guess, an ability to make some money and then go and try things out. And I tried to start a lot of businesses in those that era. We started the first ever distribution platform for West African music.
Wow.
In the early days of Afro beats, we were the first people putting that stuff on iTunes, and nobody was doing it. So I did a lot of stuff, but ultimately the goal was always to work in something that combined my two passions, really. One is the performing arts, and the other is technology. As a fully paid up geek. That was just always what I wanted to do. And whether you plan things and execute them in a linear fashion, but that's not me, or whether you have a general set of intentions which more organically end up bearing fruit, I'm not sure it matters terribly much. My approach is that I've just been interested in those areas. And so I've ended up here working in a business which is exactly that. It's a combination of large scale, high profile, interactive, technology driven experiences. That's what Monterosa is all about.
In terms of obviously being an entrepreneur, leadership and kind of that tends to come from within, doesn't it? You tend to have to sort of almost manage yourself. I mean, I've run businesses, you've run businesses. It's quite lonely occasionally at the top to sort of make all these decisions when you have to sort of carry the can as well as the rest of it. What's your sort of approach to leadership? How do you tend to how would someone describe your leadership, would you say?
I think my version of it is probably very different from anyone else's version of it. It's a bit like a lot of things. It changes fairly significantly from year to year, and I think I've had to make a concerted effort to address the changes that you need. A business that's got 5 people needs a very different type of leadership to a business. I mean, we're still a small business. There's about 100 staff, but it's very different looking after 100. To looking after 20 or even 50. And it's very different depending on what stage of business you're at. I mean, staff numbers are not the only indicator. It depends where you are on your scaling journey, where your funding's at, who do you have to lead as well. Sometimes you're not just leading staff, you're leading your board. So you on a almost annual basis, I tend to reflect and go, okay, well, what do I need to work on? And if I look back, I wish I'd have had a little bit more insight and maybe known a few more people who could support, because of course I've made many of the mistakes that that could have been avoided. You know, it maybe I started running this business about 5 years ago, and I wasn't the leader before that. I was a doer. I was a sales guy basically, and I think I probably did quite a bad job for the first couple of years. Knew what I wanted to achieve, but I didn't really know how to get what I saw. I didn't know how to get the best out of people, you know, because nobody teaches you that, or at least they can teach you it, but I hadn't been taught it. and I think that I think the best thing I've ever done in trying to work on myself as a leader is to find people to help. Like at that point, I realized I needed more inputs from people who'd done it. And so I do make a concerted effort to talk to people, to find people, whether you call it formal mentorship or not, it's not the point. Whether it's somebody that you meet in the pub every now and then, have a chat or whatever. I do make it my business to try and get as many inputs as I can so that I can affect those changes progressively. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question about what sort of leader I am. I'm one that just tries to evolve quite frequently, I would say.
Yeah. Well, no, I think I think anyone will tell you that it's an evolution in terms of how you approach, and certainly when it comes to business, as you say, you go from a relatively small number to doubling and tripling. Yeah, the dynamics change. There's more people to be there, and you can't be all things to all men. I think this is the trap that a lot of people often fall into. I guess, from your own point of view, what would you say has been sort of the bigger management lessons that you've learned? I mean, obviously we all make mistakes, I grasp that, but is there anything in particular that strikes you as something you particularly, I learned from that. That was an interesting one.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like a jigsaw. There's lots of interrelated components to successful management, whether it's at the top end or the middle end, doesn't really matter. There's lots of things that go into it, and I suppose one of my most recent observations is that you're only as good a leader as the clarity of the picture that you've got in your mind. If you don't know what you're leading towards, then you're going to be a certain type of leader that maybe there's indecision and there's a lack of clarity in that. The clearer that you can get in your own mind about what it is that you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, which is almost more important than what you're doing. If you have clarity with that, that's like the precursor to then being able to be a decent leader. And I'm not even saying that I've got that right now. It's something I work on daily. But I have seen the difference in myself between what I might be like before I formalized a new strategy and after. Once it's clear in my mind, then I become a much more effective leader for people, because I can explain and I can re-explain, and if they're not sure, I can explain, and that makes a difference. Once that's clear, then I think you unlock then the next stage. It's like a level, it's like a computer game. All right, I'm on level 2 now. Then you're in the next level, and now it becomes about fairly consistent re-messaging. You have to be very supportive of people. By and large, people don't do what you want them to do by default. By and large, they almost, it would seem, deliberately misunderstand what you're trying to say. That's just across the board. But of course, it's like getting on the same wavelength. So that's the level 2 is right. Let's get on the same wavelength. Let's make sure that the details flashed out, and then to be very supportive, and occasionally a bit of tough love. That's something I shied away from almost entirely initially, and that's probably one of the things that makes this job quite lonely. Is that there are points in the year or in a month or in a day, even in a day, when actually nobody is particularly happy with anything that you're saying. And I think I've come to terms with that now, that's actually a really important part of keeping just keeping the car on the road, going in the right direction. Sometimes you got to be pretty tough and direct with people. So combination of clarity, really descriptive, visual explanation, diagrams, metaphors, parallels, adjacent businesses that do stuff the same. Or that you could imitate, that kind of thing, I think, really important. And then, as I say, being really clear with people, and sometimes being more direct than you might want to be naturally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think as
if that makes sense.
It does. I think that ultimately, as you say, it's clarity and communication. If you're knowing where you're going, then it's easier to communicate that. As someone who's been trying to homeschool his two children, I can absolutely attest to any kind of management skills are absolutely born out of a classroom. Whether or not that's working or not, time will tell. But in terms of your abilities then to I mean, you touched then on something which I think is quite important, clarity. In the last 4 or 5 months, I don't know about you, but there's been no clarity. How have you guys sort of survived and got through, or getting through, the last few months?
This has not been a terrible thing for Monterosa's business. I mean, that's true. Wasn't great initially because we do work a lot in the TV sector, and a lot of TV shows were put on ice because of production freezes and so on. So it wasn't, there was some immediate and significant impact, but it's actually in its totality has been quite a good thing. But that's partly because we responded really fast. And I can't take the credit for this at all. It was clear to a few of us who run the business that this thing was going to happen. Like we knew that it was going to be serious early. We knew that it was going to have a big impact. We weren't the people out buying toilet rolls the day before lockdown. We'd bought a massive bag of rice about 2 months before. It was inevitable, and I think although it certainly happened very quickly, it's a bit like that Hemingway quote about how did you go bankrupt? He said very, very, very slowly and then very suddenly, or something like that. But it did happen quicker than we thought then. But what we did was made financial adjustments, cut some costs out. Didn't have to fire anyone or make anyone redundant, but we did cut some costs. We got cost under control. We actually controversially paused the fundraise because the diligence process was going to take our eye away from the core business. And we set about, instead of what our strategy has been is instead of in effect waiting for, we were about to do a capital raise and spend that money investing in products and marketing. We actually found that some of the slack that had been created by some delays to projects, we put that into product development immediately in order to accelerate what we were already planning to do. So the value of somebody spending time on product versus project is many times higher. So we actually multiplied the value of that slack. We hope. I mean, we haven't seen it back yet, but we've put it into accelerating the platform development. So we've actually we've got a major release of our platform coming out in sometime late September. That wasn't due to be ready until 2021. So we've actually made it work for us, whilst actually making sure the business is profitable during the time. Now that was our strategy: was act quickly, create and build faster than we would, and actually look to scale the business quicker and in a more efficient way than we would have done without COVID. All COVID did for us was show us that the world's sport and entertainment industries need interactive solutions more than they've ever needed them before. They need to replace revenues with better sponsors, better experiences for sponsorship. They need to drive subscriptions. They need to do everything they possibly can to get off that dependency on traditional revenue, because they're being shown it in their face that dependency is risky. And so demand has gone up, and we've responded by investing a little bit of slack that was created into product development. That's our strategy. I don't know I don't know the future, so I can't tell quite what a return that's going to give us, but it's certainly it's been quite satisfying. Actually, we've got more done than we've ever done before.
Yeah, I think it's interesting actually, and certainly as companies have adjusted to what we've been going through, and obviously in sports and entertainment. I mean, you picked up on a really interesting point. We were on a webinar about a fortnight back with regards to how to create more engagement with fans. So suddenly you've got brands like Coca-Cola, for example, who in fairness, have been doing this anyway. This is nothing new to them. But then in the panel were people from football clubs who were like, oh my God, this is like revolutionary. And you can see very clearly the difference between sort of, people who really understand it and talk the talk, really, put in some investment behind it and playing the long game versus, and it was quite a stark contrast from this football club. It was like, well, the biggest worry I've got is not having a full stadium on a Saturday. So they're exposed in very raw way was quite an interesting, I guess it's a lesson. And if people hadn't been learning it, then they sure as shit are learning it now, and it's absolutely, a key point. So I think that understanding how to build a relationship with a fan, and it's quite complex, and sports has so many different touch points, but I think that, technology is clearly playing a massive part in that. And, as software as a service in that kind of environment, again, allows people the opportunity to get closer to stuff. And I think that's something. We were at Man City a few years back, and I remember even back then they were saying, let's bring down the walls. Let's make the fans closer to the stars, not further away, in opposite to other clubs. So I think those kind of things are very, very clear. And I guess now that's where the big point is for football clubs and for any other sports governing bodies. Like, how do we remain relevant when we haven't got much live sport, and interactive gamification? How do we encourage people for that? These are all things which I know in some way, shape or form are being discussed and are happening. But it's still an unsure pathway. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think everything that you've just described and that we're seeing is nothing new now. This is an area that's been well studied and well thought about, and actually a lot of experimentation has already occurred. But what it's done is it's like an accelerant. It's what it said is I own some sort of property, whether it's a football brand or whether it's a TV show, whether it's whatever it is. I own this thing, but actually the amount of the proportion of the audience that I also own, as it were, i.e. people that I could pick the phone up to or email or whatever if I chose to, it's actually quite small. Of the billions of fans of a football club, or a top 5 Premier League club, of those billions of people that they might say are a fan, how many people can they actually contact or communicate with without having Google or Facebook in the middle? That's the thing is, how many of them are your audience and how many of them are Facebook's audience through Instagram? This is the hard reality that they're having to face. Is I'm the owner of the brand, but I don't really have that connection with the audience, because you know what? They don't need to come to my website anymore because Google do fixtures and results. They don't need to come to my app because Instagram stories are giving them everything they need, or do you know what? They get on the BBC or whatever. This is a problem for those organizations, and it's not just in sport. It's everywhere. Whatever it is that you do or that you sell, if you have intermediaries, then you have a dependency on those intermediaries. And whilst that's not going to go away, it's not like football clubs. I don't think football clubs are going to, make you subscribe to watch them in a direct form anytime soon. Maybe at the lower levels, but the mix, it's too dangerous. It's the revenue concentration mix has too much dependency on third parties, broadcasting rights, or in entertainment it might be just the TV channel itself. And I think that's the change that is happening, and it's now going to happen much quicker than it would have done before.
No, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Thinking about obviously how we arrive at these kind of business junctures and the kind of situations that we're facing. It comes down a lot of it down to advice and the quality of the advice that we often receive and often seek out. I mean, is there anything that's really sort of resonated with you in your years of working in terms of people giving you advice, and if so, what might that have been?
Yeah, I've had a lot of really bad advice.
Let's start with the crap stuff. What investment does someone say? Yeah, back this.
Lots of it.
Smash it.
Loads of it. Loads of bad advice. I tell you what I mean by that is that I mean, nobody really gives you bad advice deliberately. Everyone's got good intentions, but much of the received wisdom of management, leadership, building businesses, whatever the topic, much of that received wisdom has been extracted from a context that is different. And very rarely does the purveyor of that advice readjust the advice for the new context. They're giving, they might come out of let's say somebody comes out of an agency group or something. I'm just making this up, but they come out of an agency group and have been working as some very senior level exec in a big, successful corporation with 20,000 employees, fantastically successful, profitable for the last 10 years. They then think, because there's a bit of ego in this as well, they then think that everything that they have done and that they now believe is applicable outside in whatever context. This is being unkind, but there are a lot of people like that who just fail to recognize that what works here simply isn't applicable here. In fact, it's detrimental, very detrimental. There are instances of like management, received wisdom in management around delegation, for example, where, if you were to play it by the management rule book, you would delegate everything. You delegate everything, right? And then you realize that the people that wrote that book have never run a business. They've never actually run a business. In fact, they've never run anything like a business. They've worked in a sector which has studied running businesses. But you know what? The people that they studied were turnover of 150 million. They've been around for 30 years or whatever. The context would have been different. And I think that's a danger at, when you're at the sort of small, medium-sized level. It's hugely dangerous to take advice verbatim and not to challenge it yourself and go, actually, is that right? Should I really delegate that? Or should I just make sure that we do that one thing right this time because I know how to do it right? And then it's set in stone. Then I can replicate that 1,000 times. I never really have to go back to it again.
Yeah.
There's instances of both. On the other hand, that advice does apply on the vast majority of occasions, and you should take that advice because it is the right thing to do. So it's that nuance that I think many leaders, startup founders, that kind of thing, you can get lost if you read too many of those books. I mean, I read almost all of them, I have to say, but I'm very quick to reject some of the stuff. I mean, some of it's just,
I've recognized you are a well-read individual. And
laughable.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that in some ways, you've almost got to read it because it is just so insane. And I think the Daily Mail is a classic example. You've got to read it because you've got to know that there's madness in the world. So I think that part of it is
don't know about that. Don't take it that far, Dom. Don't have to read the Daily Mail.
Yeah, it's a shocking admission, and it's not something I want to talk about very often.
If that's what you have to tell yourself, then that's okay with me.
It is. It is. Yes, this is sharing. You see, this is how we do this. My advice is read the Daily Mail. There you go. It's the best piece of advice I've ever given anybody. So, in terms of your approach, I think that's interesting. Obviously, challenging advice, challenging that part. I totally recognize as a headhunter, when we're actually out there identifying people for new roles, it's if someone comes from a very substantial sports business into an early stage federation, their ability to transition that is crucial, and we have to challenge it every single time. Just because you came from that company doesn't mean to say that you're going to make it in this company. And as leaders, as people who ultimately will be accountable for those people, and it's our decision to push the button on that hire or engaging them, we have to be as sure as we're able to. And I think that challenge has traditionally been quite one way. I'm also encouraging people who are looking or potentially considering a new opportunity to also challenge their new employers. Can you handle my type of experience, because it is different to what you're doing, because you are looking to grow. And I think that, because we're having to be much more agile now as businesses, we have to be, capable of thinking differently and being brave, pulling the trigger on either making a decision, right, that is what we're going to be doing, and backing yourself. And I think that if anyone's learned anything in the last few years or months at least, that's something which is enormously important to recognize, certainly for businesses as they start to grow. And from that point of view, with your strategy for the next sort of 6 months to a year or so, what do you see as the Monterosa challenges?
It's a good question. Quite sure how to answer it. What are the challenges? I mean, look, the world and everybody's facing an economic dip of proportions that we haven't seen in our lifetimes, or potentially for many centuries. So, I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that is the macro problem, and the the social impact that creates. Even if a company like ours is lucky enough to be doing something that happens to be in demand during that time, as I think it is, it's easy to forget that you've got staff whose partners are being laid off. You've got work at home problems with kids. You've got the sort of life and social issues that everybody's facing. We're all facing some sort of impact, even if we're lucky enough not to be economically hit directly. So that's got to be the biggest challenge overall is people. How are people going to feel? It's difficult. And then getting back into our own business, then the challenge that we have as well. On the one hand, the business of engaging with audiences and extracting value from that attention, that's going to boom. Like it was already doing so. Like it is going to grow rapidly, but it's going to grow across a lot of different expressions of that. There's no one definition of what interaction or engagement is. There's no one way of doing it. There's lots of ways of doing it. And I think the challenge for businesses like ours is, well, can you be all things to all people? Obviously not. That never works as a strategy. So how do you get breadth? And the answer to that, in our case, will hopefully come to fruition later this year as we release new software and we start to remodel part of our proposition in order to be broader spectrum, but without us taking our eye off the ball. It's there's a challenge in doing that, and then when you look at affecting a change like that, a step change in scalability, basically, then your next challenge is, well, can I do it fast enough? And that is always the problem. It's like, I can't wait until December for that thing to be ready. We've got to figure out how to do it quicker. And I'm sorry if that's going to feel a bit stressful for a couple of weeks, but the business does not, we can't wait until January. That's too late. These are the challenges that we face, is getting stuff done quick enough to feel as though we're catching the mood of the moment. There's a balance in that, because things always work a little slower than you think they do. It's a bit of a myth that business works as quick as some people would like to suggest. Like I've heard the term, the window is going to close in the next 12 months every year for the last 4 years, and we seem to have managed quite rapid growth rate despite that.
Yeah.
So
I think we're
I mean, there's lots of challenges.
We're all experiencing our own fortnight storm closing in on us in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
No, I think it's interesting. I think that certainly agility is a phrase I'm hearing a lot when it comes to businesses and sort of planning. I don't think anyone's sort of following necessarily a sort of a hard and fast strategy. To some companies are, but I think from what I'm seeing, football clubs and sports brands, so brands that are involved in sport, are demanding greater access to the fans through the intermediaries. In this case, rather than Google or Facebook, it's Liverpool or it's Arsenal or it's Milan. And what they're looking for is much greater value in terms of where they want to be perceived in terms of the fan experience, how do they engage with each other. And there will come in at that point as well is a transaction. It's like building that funnel, building that trust, and making the fans or the people supporting that particular thing, be it music or film even. So I think those are definitely quite interesting times. Well, no, it's been an exciting period and a challenging one, but I think we'll see a bit more of it. So now on to our very famous Quantrill Partnership quickfire questions. Very important, these ones. So you are now the mayor of Birkenhead for the day. What would you do?
The mayor of Birkenhead. I would build a separate, smaller, cooler, nicer area for retail. I would demolish the current centre of town in almost its entirety and turn it into the greenest eco experience the UK has ever seen on the site of what was previously a rather ugly and horrible shopping centre.
Fair enough. We like a bit of demolition. I think you answered this question already, but reds or toffees? I'm assuming a red, given what you just said to me earlier.
Of course. Absolutely.
If you had a superpower, Tom, what would it be, and what would it and why?
Is this hypothetical, or are you asking me if I have a superpower?
Well, obviously I wouldn't ask you, because then you'd tell me and it wouldn't be a secret. But hypothetically, what is your superpower? Obviously you're levitating as we're speaking.
Yeah, I am actually. My superpower. I am disturbingly good at predicting the outcome of world events.
God.
I won 50 quid on Paddy Power when Trump won, not because I like Trump, but because I knew he was going to win. I mean, I wasn't the only one, but if that helps. I'm still spending that money, by the way. That my average bet stake is 50p a game. So
50p a game.
4 years later, I'm still in credit. Yeah.
Fair enough. Netflix or Amazon?
Netflix.
Skiing or snowboarding?
I'm terrible at both of them, but skiing.
Who won Love Island in 2019?
I can't remember.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Elvis or Sinatra?
Elvis.
Because you've got a product called Elvis, and that's probably a bit of a given, that one. And
we rebranded it. We got a letter from the Elvis Presley Foundation, and we thought, well,
what?
Don't want to get into it.
Really?
True. Yes.
What, so
we settled in the end. We settled in the end that we were allowed to use it as long as we didn't use the term the king or has left the building alongside. It's true. I've got it framed in the office. It's a true story.
God. There you go. See, that's the kind of stuff. I got a letter from the Elvis Presley estate. I mean, you've got a BAFTA on your shelf and all this stuff, but that's the letter I want to see. Fair enough.
There you go.
And last question. I know you have a very strong connection to Ghana. So how do we say thank you very much in Twi?
It's Twi, by the way. You say Madasi or Madasiwai.
Okay. See, I'm learning. So that's the whole part of the Quantrill Partnership, as we learn as we go along. But Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I had no idea that you had a letter from the Elvis Presley Foundation. That's just, that and the combination of having a brand new, clean, green housing estate, shopping centre in Birkenhead, I think is pretty much the pinnacle of my Thursday. Well, I believe it is Thursday today. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to, I think what we're going to try and do as well is to regroup with people over the course of the next few months, have the catch-ups as well. But no, mate, it's been absolutely superb. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the rest of what's going on. And we look forward to it again.
Nice one.
All right,
Thanks
mate.
a lot.
Take care.